Welcome to
Wild in the Sheets.
Wild in the Sheets.
Welcome to the JoviTalk podcast.
Okay, so we are back on the JoviTalk podcast. I've got Ville on today. He's going to be speaking all about Bon Jovi, telling us how he became a fan, his favourite albums, his favourite songs, his favourite concerts, his opinion on John's voice, which is going to be an interesting topic, and just all things Bon Jovi. So, as I always start the podcast, just introduce yourself and tell us how you became a fan.
All right, so I'm Ville. I'm from Finland. Some of you may know me from JoviTalk as BJ Fan 99. I first became a Bon Jovi fan at the age of 3, probably. It must have been around the age of 3 or 4, maybe. My dad, he's a casual fan, or used to be. Nowadays he's so fed up with my fandom that he doesn't even listen to the music anymore himself. So my dad used to blast out Crossroad on the car on the way to kindergarten, and I became a fan pretty much immediately when I first heard Prayer and Saturday Night and Bad Name and Wanted and stuff like that. I immediately, dug the songs and all about the band, the band's playing and John's vocals. They were good at the time. Yeah. Then I became a bigger fan when I found my dad's old records. I found Keep the Faith and These Days and Crush and Bounce from his record shelf. And, let's say I borrowed them, and the guy still hasn't gotten them back.
I'm intrigued because obviously the age of 3 is a young age to become a fan of, let alone anybody. Let alone Bon Jovi, of course. So I want to know what's kind of made you stay a fan of the band, because from the age of 3, that's a young age, and obviously people have I used to be a fan of a band years ago, and you just go off them. It's almost as if like you've outgrew them type of thing. So what's made you stay with Bon Jovi for such a long time?
Well, I was hooked. I was basically hooked. I just couldn't stop. The songs, well, even though my understanding of music in general was obviously very limited at the time, and I didn't know any English or anything, I just liked the songs. I loved the songs. As I said, I loved the band's playing, and I loved John's voice and everything about the songs. They were so great, full of energy. Back then they used to be a real rock band after all. And then as I said, I found my dad's old albums, and the first Bon Jovi record or thing that I got directly for myself was the box set in late 2004, and that made me even a bigger fan, because even back then I knew that stuff on that box set wasn't available anywhere else pretty much. I had all the albums from Slippery onwards already at the age of 5. I was born in 99, so during the year 2004, I got Slippery and New Jersey for my own. Wait a second, I got confused. I first got Slippery and New Jersey for my own, from a record shop. There used to be things like that
Yeah. Back in the day.
back in the good old days. And then I got the box set for the third product of Bon Jovi directly for myself. So I already owned, or basically owned, Slippery, New Jersey, Keep the Faith, These Days, Crush and Bounce at late 2004. Mm-hmm. So when I got the box set, my dad bought it to me. Needless to say, I was pumped.
Yeah.
And I immediately loved, the radio saved my life tonight, and taking it back. That's a great, very underrated song. One of the really, fast-paced rockers of the catalog. And then I get a rush, even though it's a copy of Rockin' All Over the World. It's still a good song for me. Garage Land. There are so many good songs on the box set. And of course the original demo of Always, which is just insane. The last chorus is, with the key being lifted a whole step higher. It's just, or even 1.5 step, I don't know, 1 step and a half, I don't know. But it's incredible how much range the guy had back then, in the mid-90s. So then I got Have a Nice Day, and obviously in late 2005, I got the version with the DVD. I loved the Atlantic City footage on the DVD and the documentary, even though I didn't understand a word they said. I just got hooked. I got sucked in the music, so we can speak. So I've basically been. I haven't had any break of being a Bon Jovi fan, or haven't been bored with them or anything. Of course, the last 2 or 3 albums have been a bit naff, but I still think they're worth being a fan of.
Well, that's a good point you make, because a lot of us as Bon Jovi fans, obviously, you just kind of said it yourself, the Slipperies, the New Jerseys, the These Days, we're all aware of just how good they are. There's almost hardly any fillers on them, and the fillers that are on there aren't anywhere to the standard of the fillers that are on the albums of recent times. What, obviously, as I said at the start of the podcast, is that one thing that both me and you, kind of me on Twitter and yourself on the JoviTalk forum, we both kind of go on about John's vocals, and I think it's good. It's not a negative thing that we're doing. It's just kind of, we're just picking out what we think. I want to get your thoughts on a couple of points with John's vocals. So when did you start to notice a decline? Obviously, when I say decline, I don't mean from These Days to Crush, where it was a bit different. But when did you start to see where his voice was starting to sound shot, let's say?
Well, I first saw the BBC TV concert in, was it probably late 2013? Obviously, it was recorded in January that year, but it was broadcasted by the Finnish National Broadcasting Company on the Finnish TV in late 2013, early 2014. And during the Because We Can tour, I had followed the set lists. At the end of the tour, they were starting to get really boring. They were starting to be one and the same. Pretty much every show was more or less the same. So I wasn't actively watching YouTube videos of the band live anymore after, let's say, Milan 2013. And actually, when I first saw the BBC concert from London in January 13, I thought John sounded even worse than he had done in the summer of 13. I thought he was, of course I didn't know about the general decline, but I thought that, man, he must have been rusty at the beginning of the tour. So I basically noticed that his range wasn't really there anymore, or I shouldn't say anymore. It just wasn't functioning, if I can say it properly. So I thought his voice was shot there, but I didn't think it was a permanent thing, because I thought he would have been better on the bigger tour. And as I had seen the footage from June 13, I thought his vocals were not as good as in 2010 or 2011, but I still didn't think they were bad.
Yeah.
I think he was. Back then, I thought he was just getting a bit weaker as he was aging. Of course, I knew about the smoking even back then, but I didn't think it would just completely turn things around and John would blow his voice out for good. That concert was the first time when I really noticed that his vocals were noticeably off. But the BBC one. So when the real shock about his vocals came, that must have been in 2015, when I saw the Asian tour footage in late 2015. I immediately noticed that, man, that guy can't sing for shit anymore. His voice just sounded so weak, and his range was so, seemingly limited that even though he could maybe hit a couple of high notes here and there on a good day, I immediately thought that range is gone. His voice is gone, and the tone was starting to get weaker as well. He was starting to crack and things like that. Not as extreme as in the past 2 years, but I immediately noticed that his voice was blown out. He wasn't good anymore. Yeah, that's basically it.
So I want to get your thoughts on, as we kind of mentioned there, his vocals in the 2015 tour. That was where I mean, at the end of 2013, as we said, he sounded really weak, and I kind of just put that down to tiredness and stress, obviously, with the departure of Richie, a long tour again, back-to-back tours from 2000. I just thought, right, it's time for a break, a real long break. Then they came back, obviously, with the South Asia tour in 2015, and not long before then, John done a couple of solo shows with, like, the Kings of Suburbia, and he sounded alright, to be fair, for, like, a one-off show. But then in 2015, like you said, that's kind of where I'll never forget, the pro shot of We Don't Run, and it just sounded so weak. And that was kind of where I was like, oh, this fella has really, really lost his tone and his range. I want to get your thoughts on his range or his vocals in 2015 compared to his vocals now. So in the last couple of weeks, we've had John kind of do, the Living on a Prayer, Jersey for Jersey performance that he done, where, obviously it wasn't great, let's say, it wasn't good, but he sounded a little bit better, a bit more rangy, in my opinion, than he has done for a while. I just want to get your thoughts on his vocals from 2015 to now. Have you noticed another decline? Have you noticed it's being hit and miss? What are your thoughts?
Let's say that I think John's voice is shot for good. Mm-hmm. I think he will have some levels of problems with his voice throughout the rest of his career. I don't know if it will be down to range or down to tone or down to breathing or anything, but there are so many weaknesses in his voice right now that I don't think he'll be able to fix them, at least not them all. So in 2015, even though he was sounding very, very weak, and back then I honestly thought that he couldn't sound any worse, to me, his mid-range still sounded like Jon Bon Jovi back in 2015. He couldn't sing high. That version of Always from, was it Soul? Mm-hmm. That was completely embarrassing. He was just struggling so much to even remotely get there on the chorus. But something like We Don't Run, yeah, it's weak. The tone is very thin, but it's still unmistakable. It's still unmistakably his voice. He still had the not fully the tone. It wasn't intact, but it didn't have this hoarse, monotonous sound that it has nowadays. He wasn't out of tempo, completely out of breath. He wasn't cracking on that song. He was still in tune for the most part. Hard to say, but I think the biggest problem with Jon's voice nowadays is actually not the range, because on a good day, no matter how much extra effort he puts on, let's say Better Roses or Blood on Blood or something like that, he still manages to almost nail some of the high notes here and there. Something like Better Roses in Dublin last year on Dublin Night 2, I genuinely didn't think that he would be able to sing the song as well anymore in last year, because in 2018 I thought his vocals were showing a very steep decline on pretty much any of the higher pitched songs in basically every show. So, but of course Dublin Night 2 last year was a pretty much of an exception, even with the set lists and everything. It was just above most of the shows of this House is Not for Sale tour, at least for me. All the energy and the general feeling was much closer to a regular, to a, let's say, to a real Bon Jovi show than it used to be in 2017 and 2018 for the most part. The high notes, sometimes they are there, sometimes they are not, but I think they are not the biggest problem. Also, on some days, Jon manages to sing higher than on others. That's a thing that I've noticed pretty often recently. And he seems to struggle way more with his mid-range and even his low one than with his high range, for the most part anyway. So I think his biggest problem right now is his tone. It's so hoarse. Can I say it's monotone? Mm-hmm. It's you know, it doesn't resonate anymore. He doesn't have a proper vibrato. It's all just whispering on the low and mid register, and on the high register it's basically shouting. It's, you know, he doesn't have any real vocal qualities anymore, if I can say. It's pretty much, you know, relying on muscle memory right now, because all the other physical attributes of his voice have gone. I don't know. He's cracking a lot. He runs out of breath basically all the time. has a hard time managing long notes. He can't pronounce words properly. Basically, every word which requires a long note of an A or an E, it just comes out as A, like that. Something like Born to Be My Baby is very cringeworthy when he sings something I know deep inside. It sounds like he starts to sing the word inside and then someone sticks something up his butthole. Being honest.
That's one way to describe it. That's a good way. That's something I like that. Like kind of what you've said is pretty much, you know, my thoughts as well. The one thing that, you know, that I want to go back to what you just said is Dublin Night 2 was kind of the highlight of the tour, let's say, for various reasons. I was lucky enough to attend that show, and from a personal point of view, John was John Bon Jovi that night in terms of the front man. You know, it was raining and it didn't bother him. He came outside, you know, he came out with like an Irish top on and was showing it to the crowd and was just bouncing up and down. There was 6 songs difference from the night before, which is kind of more Bon Jovi, you know, certainly from like 2008 to 2011, where you just don't know what songs you're going to get. There felt a bit of a change. Vocally, yeah, obviously, you know, it's not perfect, but it was certainly, you know, at the time, being at the show, you don't really notice it, or you don't notice it half as much as you do on like a YouTube recording. So for me, you know, John sounded like he did in 2013, let's say, while I was there. And then obviously you come back and you do notice a couple of changes, but it was just more of a Bon Jovi show. It felt more, it wasn't something I was embarrassed by. And one thing that I was nervous about was being embarrassed going to the shows, because as you said there, 2015 to 2000 and even 2019, you know, the early 2019 shows were quite poor. He stepped it up a bit in Europe, vocally and as a frontman, because he was glued to the mic for almost every single other show except the European shows and then on. I want to know your thoughts on what's going to happen with the 2020 album in terms of the sound of his voice, because yeah, 2015 didn't sound great, but then 2016, obviously on the album, he sounded decent, you know, on the This House Is Not For Sale tour. This House Is Not For Sale album, I think he sounded decent. But I think on Limitless and Unbroken so far, you can already hear the change in John's vocals. I just want to get your thoughts on what you think, you know, is going to happen towards the album. Do you think you're going to maybe cringe a little bit at the sound of his voice, you know, on the album? Do you think they're going to not hide his vocal issues as much as they did in 2016, because he's already been on tour and hundreds and thousands of people have already heard what he sounds like now? I just want to get your thoughts on what's going to happen.
Well, I noticed on Unbroken that his tone has changed a lot, even on the studio environment. It sounds rough. The hoarseness is there. Even the clips of his voice, you know, the clipping or cracking, it's there. He sounds... In the studio, he still sounds like John, but he sounds like, let's say, 70-year-old John Bon Jovi instead of a 57, 58-year-old one. And on Limitless, I actually noticed that his rasp is pretty much gone. I thought he would have a more aggressive approach to his vocals on that song because it's upbeat. Even on Knockout, which is basically, in my opinion, that's the song which Limitless is based on.
Yeah.
That must have given John the idea to write Limitless on the first place. He must have, you know, tried to rewrite Knockout. The chord progression is the same. The overall feeling is the same. But even on Knockout, his vocals were more raw. He had this, you know, the typical post-2000 Shanks produced rasp
Yeah.
that he used to have from Have a Nice Day onwards. In Limitless, he was singing very clean, but he sounded, let's say, tinny. He sounded like, not nasal, but he was sounding like, a little bit like this, He had this throaty, almost metallic tone to his voice. Not metallic in terms of, the music scene, but it sounded shrill.
Yeah.
More reminiscent of the late 2013 shows than his studio vocals on the Burning Bridges and This House Is Not For Sale albums. And, I don't think Shanks or anyone can completely change his damaged tone anymore. His tone has gotten so, weird. It sounds so unnatural that I don't think his voice will ever sound organic on an album again. It's hard to say. I don't think he'll ever push his voice on an album anymore like he did even as recently as in 2015 on the studio. Well, of course, it was the only version of Who Would You Die For that we have heard. I can bet every single thing in my whole Bon Jovi collection that he wouldn't be able to deliver even 1/10 of what was achieved in the studio on Who Would You Die For live.
Yeah.
He's completely lost the clarity of his voice. Let's say his voice nowadays, it used to sound smooth in the 90s and even the early 2000s. And it was clean, it was pure. But nowadays, I think he sounds dry. He sounds, not toneless, but I don't know. He just has lost that purity and clarity. So we can say. For me,
like you mentioned there, sorry to buzz in, but you mentioned obviously Who Would You Die For, and one thing a lot of Bon Jovi fans kind of want to know is when was the vocals of Who Would You Die For recorded, because obviously, as you said there, it was 2015, and shortly after that album was the Asian tour, and he sounded nowhere near the level of that song, as so I'd love to know when that was recorded, because obviously that for me is, even including the 80s and 90s, that for me is one of a focal highlight for John, that song. Whether it's just because I was surprised by it or not, I don't know, but it was a focal highlight for me. I want to know when that was recorded, as you said, due to just the rasp, the aggression in the vocal, the difference in his vocals, the power. I want to know, when do you think that song was recorded?
I think they might have recorded the song on 2 occasions. Some of the song actually sounds like his 2014-2015 voice. The nasality and the way he, pronounces some of the low to mid-range notes, and, the way he stretches his voice on some of them, it unmistakably brings out his more recent tone. But the choruses, I think they may have laid out some kinds of demo levels, some kinds of layers around 2000 and probably 2008, 2009. His rasp on that song is pretty much similar to, let's say, Any Other Day on Lost Highway, which was probably recorded in 2006, late 2006, early 2007. I don't think it was recorded in 2013, because or actually 2012, because even on the What About Now album, his rasp and his tone on the high register had already changed. It was much cleaner. I dare say it was a bit weaker. So I think it was recorded, the verses were recorded in 2014 or 15, and the choruses, at least the most demanding high parts with the most rasp, at the end and everything, they must have been recorded for the circle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of when I imagined it. I was thinking, something not certainly not Lost Highway, but my thoughts were either the Have a Nice Day album, which may be a bit too early for it, but there's just something about that power. It reminds me of the last like kind of shouting I Want to Be Loved, where he has like that little bit of a rasp at the end of that song. It kind of reminded me of that, so I thought it may have been 2005, or as you said, maybe something for the circle where, like Love's the Only Rule, certainly live had a little bit of rasp to it as well, and it kind of sounded a bit like that vocal. It is.
Or actually, I thought they might have recorded it, or those parts anyway, on that song for the Greatest Hits collection in 2010.
Yeah.
Because his rasp on No Apologies, the studio version, and This Is Love, This Is Life, sounds very similar to that one.
Yeah, that could be a good shout as well. It's interesting. I mean, we could speak about John's vocals all day, and I imagine only he knows what's really going on and what's really caused it. But a lot of rumours, and certainly so over the past few months, I'd say more than years, but over the past few months I've seen a lot of rumours that John around 2016 to 2017 actually had vocal surgery, and as we know with a couple of people, a couple of musicians in the past, it can go wrong. It can almost damage it even more. And in some ways, as you said there, 2017 kind of was like really, really bad in vocals. Certainly, in my opinion, possibly yours about John's vocals.
Yeah.
Do you think he maybe had vocal surgery and that's why it's deteriorated over the last 2 to 3 years? I'm talking more 2016 to 2019, as you said. 2020 seemed a little bit better towards the end, but do you think he had vocal surgery, and do you think if so that it did ruin it a little bit?
Well, I don't know, but to me the most drastic thing about John's vocal decline has been his total change of tone. It was the shrill, whiny tone in late 2013 and continued until the Asian tour in 2015. It was still pretty close to what it used to be in late 2013 on the 2015 tour. Only that he had started to crack a bit more. But as I said, he still sounded like himself for the most part. It was just the high notes that just didn't come out. So in 2016, on the first hand, I noticed that he was starting to alter his technique. I noticed that he started to use this whispery technique that he still uses, not as much anymore, but on some parts, even on the prayer version from the Jersey for Jersey broadcast, it sounded like that 2016, 2017 tone for the most part. His tone in 2016, it got, I don't know, it started to get, it was thin in in late 2013 to 2015 already. But in 2016, it got, totally powerless. His voice was on some of the mid-range songs like Who Says and Destination Anywhere, Because We Can, stuff like that. On the choruses, I thought his voice was about to completely blow out because his voice was so thin, so tiny, so tinny, so weak, breathless, everything. It sounded like he wouldn't be able to get any voice out at all in a couple of years. So to me, that was a sign of something that had happened. But in early 2016, that when that was most noticeably the case, I don't think he had the surgery yet. I think his voice was just totally shut. It was on the verge of disappearing for eternity in general, in the literal sense.
Yeah.
For me, at least. So when they came back with the band for the This House Is Not For Sale promo shows, I actually think he sounded different. He sounded not fuller, not thicker, but his voice was different. It was weird. It was rough on the mid-register. It back then I thought it may have been rasp of some kind that he was trying to bring out. But when I've been listening to those shows and the Miami promo show, especially from December 2016 recently, I've noticed that his tone had changed. His voice had started to clip in the mid-register. It wasn't rasp, it was just strain. It was showing the strain and damage. But as that wasn't there in that extreme level in early 2016, even in mid-2016, he still sounded clearer and cleaner in Dublin at the Acoustic Storyteller show. I thought somewhere between July, August, or something like that to October, November 2016, he may have had some kind of a surgery. And obviously in attempt to restore his range, to regain his range and tone, he must have thought that it would help him recover his voice dramatically. But as I said, I immediately noticed that his tone had damaged even more for some reason. Of course, back then I didn't think he had a surgery, but I thought it was, I don't know, it was just weird.
It has, like, the change has been absolutely crazy, but, you know, you kind of hope that a lot of people are saying, you know, maybe this little break might do him well. Usually I've kind of thought that his voice, you know, certainly 2008, 2011, you know, it kind of warms up as the tour goes on. It was kind of 2013, as we said before, that the end of that tour, certainly in Australia, and certainly like the pro shots that they done, you could really notice like a change in his vocals and the struggle, and, you know, his facial expressions were changing even more so, and he was going more red. You know, we kind of noticed all these things, but, you know, as I said before, we could go on about John's vocals forever. I do wanna change the subject a little bit and speak about your experiences of shows that you've been to. So tell us how many shows, Bon Jovi shows, you've attended, and, you know, what was the latest show that you went to?
Well, I've seen them 3 times. I first saw them in Helsinki 2008, and the second time was in Helsinki 2011, and for the last time I saw them in Tallinn last year.
So how do you rank them shows? Obviously, the most memorable one, you know, that you've just mentioned there was, for a lot of Bon Jovi fans, would be Helsinki 2011, due to the fact that John obviously injured his knee again, if I'm not mistaken. Jordan lost the only rule at that show.
Yeah.
You know, I want you to, in fact, let's talk more about that show before we move on. So you're the first person I've spoke to who attended that show, who I can actually have a conversation with about it. So, explain to us, one, when John injured his knee, did you notice at the time? And two, how did the rest of the show go? Did they affect the show at all? Did John go into, autopilot mode at all? Or did he kind of pull it out the bag still? What was your thoughts on that show?
I didn't see the exact moment when he got injured back then, but I noticed that he kind of seemed tame for the second part of the show. I thought he wasn't moving like he used to. At the end of the show, I noticed that he didn't do the jump at the end of prayer, the iconic, the
almost Michael Jordan-esque.
Yeah, which he still does in every show.
Yeah.
And at the end of the show, after prayer, I noticed that when they left the stage, John looked very uncomfortable when, walking down the stairs. I noticed that he hung on the handrails and, I thought that his leg was sore from something, but I didn't know where or how or why. Then I saw the video a couple of days later, and of course, then I noticed that the reason for all the things that I had seen at the show was there. And the second one, as I said, John got pretty tame after the injury. He wasn't moving. Obviously, his moving on stage wasn't comfortable, but near the end of Love's the Only Rule, what I think was even more admirable, or even more crazy, whatever you want to call it, was that he went for an additional walk around the stage with an injured knee. He went to the catwalk and, walked through the whole catwalk around the stadium, even though he had already blown out his knee. I don't know how he did that, probably with the help of pure adrenaline or something like that, but it was just freaky how well the guy, held up. And the set list, back then I was very impressed with Wild is the Wind and John singing I'll Be There For You, because obviously I hadn't got Wild is the Wind in 2008, and Richie sang I'll Be There For You at that show. So with John singing I'll Be There For You in 2011, and all the ad-libs and improvisations he did at the end of the song, they were gold for me. Reminded me of the Yokohama 96 Pro Shot show that I had seen some years earlier for the first time. Back then I didn't really, follow the bootlegs or anything. I pretty much had only seen what was released officially or semi-officially, such as, Yokohama 96, Tokyo 2008. That stuff I was familiar with at that point already, but I certainly didn't know about all the audience bootlegs and the full concert videos.
Well, you've mentioned a good point in, John was it's crazy how not only, did he carry on the show, but as you said, he was still moving about as much as he could. And not only that, he went on to finish it all, with that injury. And we say, it was like a knee injury, but I'm a personal trainer, and an ACL is like a frightening injury to get. The amount of people who stop having to play sports due to it, who've had parts of their, like the cartilage taken out of the knee and the movement's gone and impact stuff. I know people who can't even, we've just said there, John still does the iconic jump. I know people who can't even jump onto a small step after an ACL injury. It's really crazy how John's managed to go on for how long he has. Because don't forget, he's done it twice. Obviously 2010, I think it was, in the New Meadowlands Stadium. He done it, and then obviously in 2011, and he's still going strong. He's still moving about really well for not only just for his age, but with them injuries. But one thing I've got open here is Setlist FM from the Helsinki show that you went to in 2011. And the setlist actually probably is better after Love's the Only Rule than it was before in terms of songs that got played. You know, you've got Love's the Only Rule, which is one of my favourite songs by the band. Then
Mine too.
Say it again, sorry?
Mine too.
It's a fantastic song. Then, you know, Bed of Roses, yeah, it's not a rarity, but it's not an easy song. Then I'll Be There For You straight after. No Apologies was a little bit further down. Have a Nice Day, Keep the Faith ended the show. And then the encore is one of such a good encore. Opened up with Thorn in My Side. Then Wanted Dead or Alive, which is obviously a staple in most shows. And then Wild as the Wind, and then Pray. Like, that's a solid show. I mean, we as a fan now would do anything for that type of set list. But John could have easily finished on Keep the Faith, or finished on, you know, Keep the Faith, then Pray, and got off. Do you know what I mean? He could have, to carry on and sing two fairly rare songs in Thorn on My Side and Wild as the Wind just in the encore. You got to give him credit there, because, as I said, he could have just done Wanted Dead or Alive and Prayer as the encore. But credit to him, you know, he seems to have pulled it out the bag.
Sorry?
He seems to have, you know, pulled that set list, you know, that he still delivered.
Yeah.
It's a solid set list.
Yeah, and I think actually, when I've seen more videos of the tour in recent years, I've been watching footage from pretty much every gig from that tour. I have wanted to compare them with each other, and I've even been so, you know, brave that I've watched Düsseldorf in full. Show is obviously, it has a reputation of a pretty bad show.
Yeah.
For the period, it wasn't great, but right now, I can't even say what I would do if the guys played a show like that, with one sounding like he did back then. Something like Bristol, God damn it, Living in Sin and Hard Letting You Go and stuff like that. Hard Rock Calling with Hey God and Always and These Days, Dry County, Saturday Night, Blood on Blood. Those set lists, they are to die for. Especially at this moment. Back then, I remember, or I didn't read the JoviTalk forum back then, but a couple of years back, I think, I read through some of the show threads on the tour discussion board. I read the Bristol thread, and there was a comment that, well, it's not a great set list, but it's a step in the right direction. Well, that only goes to show how high the standards were back then, because to me, a show which includes Just Older, In These Arms, Living in Sin, Blaze of Glory, Saturday Night, and Hard Letting You Go is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Even for those standards, I think it's very, 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 very good. And the encore of Saturday Night, Hard Letting You Go, Wanted and Prayer, God, you couldn't even think of a better single encore to me.
Yeah.
It's crazy how much it has declined in every way since then. And yeah, his energy, especially at the two Dublin shows at the end of the June leg, his mobility on stage was extraordinary. He was running around the stage and jumping on both legs and everything, even though he was wearing the brace. He seemed possessed.
Yeah.
it seemed like he had such strong painkillers and all the protection that he needed to have that he could manage a 3-hour set without showing particularly much of his injury. The impact it had, of course, he had the brace on in every show, but it didn't stop him from moving, and he was moving quite normally. So he must have had a giant dose of extra adrenaline to pull those shows off. I don't know.
It is. It like that. That's one thing I noticed as well. Like in the 2011 shows, even with the injury, the energy that he had was just crazy. I mean, I still today, watch performances where, as you said, he's got that knee brace on and he's jumping on both legs. Like, you're like, how are you functioning? A 2.5 hour, 3 hour show with a ACL injury that you've done a year before as well, and you're playing back-to-back shows, you're singing better than you have done in 15, maybe 10 years time, let's say. How was he still managing that? And it kind of makes me think, has that had an impact on today? As you said there, was he on this medication and was he forcing his voice back then so much, even in 2011, to have the impact it did now? Who knows? 2011 was such a special time to be a fan.
Yeah, I think physically the guy is simply not a human. He's just unbelievable with his, all the physical attributes that he still continues to have to this day. I can't name a better frontman or a more energetic frontman if someone threatened to kill me. I just can't believe how much energy the guy still has, and how much functionality he still has on his physical energy and physical abilities. He's moving like a 25, 30-year-old in every show.
Yeah, like watching him tires me out, and as I said, with my job I should be 10 times fitter than he is, 30 years younger. But another thing that I noticed in the 2018, 2019, like, it was something, there was a backstage photo of him and he was still ripped to shreds on like his stomach. He still had a six-pack at 55, 56 years of age at that point. And it just shows, that the man still keeps fit. Maybe he hasn't looked after his voice, but his health still seems to be there. He still seems fit and healthy in terms of, as you said, running around. We know that he's a keen runner. He does a lot of running when he's off tour and whatever else. You can't knock, how he's kept himself physically in shape, as you said. I want to move on to your favourite ever, if you had to choose one, your favourite go-to Bon Jovi show. So if you had every single Bon Jovi show live on DVD in front of you and someone said to you, right, you can only choose one show, what one would you choose?
This is easy. Philadelphia, 1989.
Oh, okay. What's the reason for choosing that show?
Well, it was kind of like a turning point for the band. It was early 89. It was March, if I remember correctly. It showed a band that was still youthful. They still had the crazy manic energy from 85, 86. But at the same time, they were ultimately starting to mature out a little bit. They were playing very well, very sharp. John's energy was infectious. His vocals were stunning. The set list, well, it was a true old school rock and roll Bon Jovi show.
Yeah.
It was short. Let's say it like this. It was pretty short for nowadays standards. It was just, I think it was 2 hours.
Yeah.
Maybe 2 hours and 1 minute or something like that. to be more exact. But to me, God, how could I forget that "I'll Be There for You" performance?
Yeah.
Those screams and the ad libs and all the energy that he put on that one, and Blood on Blood and everything. Bad Medicine done with Shout for one of the first times, with the two girls dancing with John on the stage and everything. It didn't seem merely like a regular Bon Jovi concert even at that time. If I had been there, if I had been around back then and I had been there, pardon me for my language, but it would have been a religious fucking experience.
Yeah, definitely. 100%. I mean, just looking at the set list there, as you said, you know, it was a short show for today's standards, but back then it was still 19 songs and they were only 4 albums in. And, you know, yeah, we're never going to get half of these songs anymore, but Lay Your Hands on Me as an opener, I'd Die For You, Wild in the Streets, Tokyo Road, Let It Rock. You know, as you said, that I'll Be There For You performance is spectacular. Living in Sin to open an encore, Ride Cowboy Ride, Bad Medicine with Shout, and then Never Say Goodbye to end the show. Like, that is an unbelievable set list. You know, like 19 songs, but 10 of them we probably will hardly hear, or it's so rare. You know, they even threw in a couple of covers with the Skid Row cover, or the free cover, should I say, with Skid Row for All Right Now. It was just, you know, that's such a solid show. Which then gets me on to question, what's your favourite album then? If that's your favourite show, what's your favourite album?
Let's see, it depends on the day, but right now it's New Jersey.
Okay.
For the most part, it's these days.
Yeah.
But right now it's New Jersey because I simply love it. I can't explain. It has so many of my favorite songs. Blood on Blood, which is in my personal top 5 of Bon Jovi songs of all time. Wild is the Wind, obviously, and Stick to Your Guns. And of course the classics, you know, Lay Your Hands on Me, Bad Medicine, Born to Be My Baby, Living in Sin, I'll Be There for You. It's close to being a perfect album.
Yeah. So what stops it from being a perfect album for you?
99 in the Shade.
Really, yeah?
Yeah. I don't know. It's not a filler. I don't say it's a bad song or even a mediocre song. I just think it would have been better on some of the other albums in the 80s. I still think it fits the album. The sound is, you know, unmistakably the one of New Jersey, and the song, you know, fits the album in style. But to me, 99 in the Shade is just not as epic as pretty much all the other songs on New Jersey.
Yeah. I then want to move on. So I always ask Bon Jovi fans this on the podcast. I want to know your top 5 Bon Jovi songs, and I want you to give a brief description of why they are your top 5 favourite Bon Jovi songs.
Let's see. The 5th one must be Keep the Faith. I think the studio version pales in comparison to most live versions from, let's say, 93 to 2001 even. It was such of a beast of a live track. All the screams and ad-libs, and, you know, they threw in Sympathy for the Devil multiple times and stuff like that. It was just unbelievable. And it worked better when they played it faster live than it was on the record. On the record, it's still great, it's still energetic, it's still rocking, but it kind of plods along. until you compare it to the nowadays live version, which is on the tempo. It's pretty close to the album version, I assume, when they used to play it much faster on even the Circle Greatest Hits tour. I think it was much more of an energetic song quite recently live. But yeah, that's probably my fifth favorite. My fourth favorite must be These Days. It's just such a nostalgic song for me. And it's such a passionate performance on John's vocals, even on the record. But to me, the ultimate version of the song was in Paris '96 or something like that, on a TV show. Was it that?
Yeah.
Was that Taratata or whatever it was? That was such an amazing version. John just sang his heart out. He bled his heart out, threw everything in. It was a song that when he performed it live, he never performed it 100% the same way twice. He always delivered something a bit different on, especially the second verse. Although sometimes he changed a little bit of the lyrics on the second verse, I remember a more recent live version. Was it Edinburgh in 2011? Yeah, Edinburgh. In 2011, when he had blown out his knee in Helsinki. And he was singing something like, Jimmy's shoes busted, Johnny's shoes busted both his legs, trying to learn to fly. From the second story window, his knee popped, he closed his eyes, something like that. And also on the first verse, in Germany, 2003, he sang to the hotel room on the boulevard, I guess she's trying to be like me instead of she's trying to be James Dean.
Yeah.
Those little things always made me, that made These Days such a special live song. And the third one, Prayer, obviously, because, or not obviously, because for some people it would be obvious that Prayer would be the best song. But to me, it's the third one. It's a bit cliched, but it's still such a great song. It's a powerful song with a unique, universal message of, trying to hold on even when things are tough. And of course, it sounds like total crap nowadays live when John sings it. But whenever he goes silent on the choruses, it's still such a powerful experience live to hear it. In Tallinn last year, he sang it like absolute shit. But when he let the crowd sing at the end, the two final choruses, it just felt like a Bon Jovi show again for a brief moment, even though John was struggling like hell vocally throughout the show. And it's just one of those tracks that never gets old. And Blood on Blood is the second one. It has a deep personal meaning to me because I've made lots of new friends during the last couple of years, especially when I started high school. I graduated last year. When I originally started high school in 2016, I didn't have really many friends back then, or, I didn't have very many real friends. I had those sorts of friends that I would talk to during recesses and everything, but I didn't have, I had maybe one or two friends that I would see during my free time. And during the last 3 or 4 years, I've made dozens of friends And Blood on Blood has, been a very important song for me personally, because it brings up the importance of friendship and brotherhood, and, always being there for all of your friends. And the first one, Someday I'll Be Saturday Night. It's a song that has helped me through a very tough time, a couple of years ago. I won't go to any personal details. I've mentioned it a couple of times on JoviTalk. I think I have mentioned at one point the thing on, what happened. I had mentioned it, shortly, briefly at some point, but I don't think I have to go to that discussion or that subject now.
Yeah.
But Someday I'll Be Saturday Night has been a song that has, gotten me through a very hard period of sadness and frustration and even bitterness. It has made me believe that there's always a better tomorrow, and even though things might suck at this moment, there's always hope for a better situation in my life, and life continues and everything will be fine.
So it's a different range of songs really in your top 5, and that's the reason I always ask people what the top 5 are, because I find top 5 is so much different. As you said, Living on a Prayer, a lot of people do have, but there's a lot of also diehards who don't have it in the top 5, and I still find it interesting when diehard Bon Jovi fans do have it in their top 5, because we all know how good a song it is, we all know how big a song it is, but it still holds something special for us diehards, even though we've heard it at every single Bon Jovi show, and we heard it on every TV station and every radio station wherever we go. If anyone mentions Bon Jovi, it's always the song that comes up. It's on every party. But I think that's why it's so special for us as Bon Jovi fans. It's a song that is iconic, and always will be. And I think that's a solid top 5. Before we wrap it up, I always like to ask, is there anything else you'd like to say, anything you'd like to talk about before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I would like to, shortly discuss some of my favorite bootlegs.
Yeah, definitely. Go for it.
Yeah, because that was in my plans, if you have any time left.
Of course, go for it.
Yeah, okay. So, first of all, we already discussed Philadelphia 1989.
Yeah.
That's a great show. That's pretty much a perfect Bon Jovi show, for those standards anyway. But from the 90s on, I really, 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 really love the audio bootleg of Tampa 1995, which Dominic released last year, if I remember correctly, on YouTube. It's such a great show, a long show with all the gems from these days, and a stellar version of Keep the Faith and stuff like, with a little help from my friends, and the iconic version at the end of This Ain't a Love Song, where John switches to a higher octave on the last chorus. He brings out his, 89, 91, 92 voice at that final chorus, which he was pretty cleverly avoided at that point for the most part already. He was singing much cleaner for the most part in 95 and 96, but he brought that old school raw sound out and really went for it. It just blew me away when I first heard it. And let's see. From 2000 on, of course, there are much more high-quality bootlegs with, great picture quality. And in my personal opinion, my favorite post-2000 bootleg of a full Bon Jovi concert is Philadelphia 2011. Looking back, the set list isn't too spectacular for 2010 to 2011 standards. And of course, there still are songs like Just Older and Saturday Night, Electric Saturday Night, and Blood on Blood, and In These Arms and stuff like that. I'll Be There For You. It would be a great, great set list if they played it today.
Yeah.
But and God, how could I forget Diamond Ring? Yeah. That would, make most of the diehards completely, lose their minds nowadays.
Yeah.
But what really stuck to me from that show was the energy. It was John's 49th birthday. The guy was totally out of control. He was a maniac. I probably hadn't seen him act like that on stage since, I don't know, the Bounce tour. And even after that show, the shows in Europe, they obviously got some tremendous set lists, some totally unpredictable stuff. But to me, John has never been able to get solely into that zone that he was in at the Philadelphia show anytime later on. He was going for everything. He was throwing all out. I basically thought with that energy, he would fall off the stage at some point. He was, running back and forth and doing, lots of raspy vocals. Keep the Faith was probably one of the best post-2000 performances of that song I've ever heard. Same with Saturday Night. He didn't do any ad-libs on Saturday Night, but the way he went nuts on the last chorus and, really brought out every single bit of vocal power he had at that point, and all the rasp and everything. It was just unbelievably intense. He had that, he had that quality about him at that show that made him, that makes him the best rock and roll frontman in history, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. No offense to Jagger, no offense to Bruce, no offense to Steven Tyler, but only John is, John.
Yeah, no, I agree. He's number one as a frontman for me, definitely.
Yeah. Still, actually, for me, he still is. Quite oddly, I really enjoyed watching Rio last year. His vocals were totally horrendous. He was struggling on basically every song, more or less. But the energy was so sky high, it just didn't matter. The guy couldn't keep still. He was running up and down, back and forth the stage all the time, interacting with the crowd, going to the crowd, everything. If I turned the sound off on the Rio 2019 show and didn't pay attention to John's gray hair, I would easily believe it's from, the Crush era or something like that.
Yeah, definitely.
The energy is so high. And Bootlegs, what else is there? I've always had a soft spot for the Nokia Theater show in 2005.
Yeah.
Obviously, it was a promo show. It wasn't a real, kind of like a real tour show. And it was quite a short show. I think it was about an hour and 20 minutes. But, that's also one of those shows alongside Philadelphia 2011 where the energy is so great that the set list doesn't matter at all. They played it at the Nokia Theater show, if I remember correctly. They played 3 new songs, and all the rest of the songs were the basic hits. And the radio saved my life tonight. Yeah. But the way John attacked on Have a Nice Day, all the rasp, and and everything. He went for the choruses like they were recorded, even instead of dodging the more demanding parts on the choruses like he already did in 2006. And the extended breakdown on Born to Be My Babe, the so deep inside before the last chorus, that was very intense. And he did one of the last old school screams on Keep the Faith during the solo, which to me was an essential part of the song. You know, something like that, you know, still catches my attention every time when I see a recent performance of Keep the Faith. I still look around like, what the hell, where is the scream? I got so used to it when I was younger and listening all those, you know, older recordings of the song. Moscow, 89.
Mm-hmm.
Widely known, widely spread, of course. Well, it's just a legendary show. The version of Blood on Blood is probably the best of that song I've ever seen them do on any show, be it on YouTube or, God forbid, Tallinn last year. Well, actually, I want to tell a little bit about Tallinn last year as a, you know, side note. When I was there last year, I genuinely thought John sounded better than I had expected.
Yeah.
Until he did Blood on Blood after God Bless This Mess at that show. Even these days, I thought it was considerably better than it had been, or it could have been, in my opinion, at that point. Anyway, so when he did Blood on Blood, it completely killed his voice. Then he did We Got It Going On and Bad Medicine, and was totally spent. I said to my parents, who I was with, I said, let's see what he'll do as an encore. And then he did, then the band came back and did Just Wanted and Prayer. When John started singing Wanted, I immediately turned to my parents and said, yeah, he's done for tonight. It's just intense. It's just, what was I saying? It's just incredible how much the energy level and the vocal confidence of John can, you know, change the whole feeling of the show, even though the set list can be pretty bland, like it was at the Nokia Theatre show. Even for nowadays standards, it's nothing special really, but the energy was just contagious. Of course, the Moscow 89 show was legendary in every aspect. John came on the stage on the Soviet Union, you know, the uniform and everything, and with the police guard at the audience walking beside him. It was just something that I don't think many, if any, other bands have done on that form, that entrance. And I think what made Bon Jovi special as a live act back in the old days was that they were so different from basically every other big touring act. They were always, especially in Europe, they were always changing their set lists, and that really impacted the general feel of the shows. They were taking requests in 2013. Oh man, I'm stuttering. my tongue is starting to get dry. Even in 2013, they were taking requests. I remember the Birmingham version of Always. And before that was in June 2013. And before that, John takes a poll on the audience that which songs they would like to hear. And he lists songs like Hey God and Living in Sin and I Die for You, these days, something like that. Stuff that you would never hear him mention again on a request taking purpose, because I know he knows he can't sing them convincingly anymore. So it's very clear why he's avoiding most of the risky stuff nowadays. He just doesn't want to. Well, it's stuff like, prayer, of course, and keep the faith. And Better Roses, he always sounds pretty decent on, obviously, but other stuff, Born to Be My Baby, Bad Medicine, stuff like that, he really struggles on nowadays. And back then, he was still taking the more demanding, the very demanding stuff as requests and playing songs like Always these days, This Ain't a Love Song, stuff like that, Dry County, on a pretty regular basis. So nowadays, I don't think he would have the balls to take any requests of an audience anymore, because there are songs that the audience would like to hear that he has to, just shoot down. He can't do them anymore. Not because he sounds any better on any of the other songs he does, but I think it's just that he doesn't want to embarrass himself any further than what's necessary.
Yeah. I think you've named like some solid shows there, and as you said, even sometimes the set list isn't perfect, and even as Bon Jovi fans, even to today's standards, there's some set lists that the band have played, there's some shows that the band have played, as you said there, for instance, the Rio show, where John's just as energetic as ever, and it makes you go back to that show because it's enjoyable to watch. Yeah, the vocals aren't great at all, but you kind of, sometimes when John's as energetic as he is, you do sit back and you kind of go, do you know what though, that's still a solid show in different ways, not just the vocals. And that's kind of why the Dublin shows from 2019 are held so high for me, even the Anfield and the Wembley shows, because he didn't sound like he did 6 years prior, let alone 20 years ago. He still puts on one hell of a show, and as you've said, and as I'll back you up, John is still for me the best frontman, certainly on his day. When John's moving about and when he's energetic and when he's interacting with the crowd and smiling and in a good mood, when John's in a good mood, there is no one better than him.
Yeah, and I've also noticed that whenever he's in that really energetic mood and really happy, he always wills to push his voice to achieve better results.
Yeah.
Even at the Rio show last September, he went for Always. It was painful, but he went for it.
Yeah.
Because he was in the mood. He did Better Roses, and even though he cracked a bit on a couple of choruses, it was still a pretty decent rendition. He managed to hit most of the high notes. Same with It's My Life. He was moving about all the time. He did a scream on Keep the Faith, stuff like you rarely see at recent shows. Even when he's energetic, he's still, let's say, reserved on a lot of things. So I think he still decides the cities and the situations where he really feels like he wants to pull out all the stops and where he can play it safer. I can't say he's, not putting the same effort to every show. I think with those vocal problems that he has nowadays, he simply has to push his maximum levels out in every show nowadays.
Yeah.
But the way he displays his energy and the way he, adds all those different things, even in recent shows, like Dublin Night 2 or Rio and stuff like that. Dublin Night 2 had a stunning Saturday night. Stunning, I'll be there for you with all those old ad libs. An extra encore of these days. Those things are, in some ways, still reminiscent of the old days.
Yeah.
If I can say it like that. To me, Dublin Night 2 last year is probably the best Bon Jovi show since Milan 2013, alongside Sao Paulo 2017. Those two shows are just, even though John still sounded better even in Brisbane 2013 than he did even at the best shows last year, the energy was just totally out of this world. The passion, the effort, it was just incredible how, let's say it like this, it's only John Bon Jovi who really knows how to deliver stellar shows with no voice.
Yeah.
Whenever he's in the mood. I don't think something like David Lee Roth or Paul Stanley, Vince Neil, guys that are in a similar vocal shape to John's one, they can still be energetic as all hell and everything, but their awful vocals ruin the shows for me. To me, John has so many additional qualities that are not at least directly connected to his voice, that whenever he goes for the full frontman persona, I don't say his vocals become unnecessary, but he manages to push all those other things out so well. So he manages to maintain such a high level of energy and intensity in his overall performing, and he manages to display so many of his other great performing abilities that him being in a weak or even terrible vocal shape doesn't really matter.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything there. And as you say, Bon Jovi don't have any pyro at the shows anymore, or he doesn't run across like a bridge like he used to, over the crowd or anything. It is literally just the band and a little small circle or a runway, and that's literally it. That's all that the band have. And as you said, the screens are good, but it doesn't, certainly when you're at the show, it's hard to take that in. Whereas with some of the other bands that you mentioned there, they've got costumes, or they've got face paint on, or fireworks going off. They've got other distractions. And as you said, one thing that John Bon Jovi, even though he hasn't got the vocals, he still knows how to put a good show on. And that's why we're still a fan, and that's why we'll still see the shows, and it's why we've spoke so long about our favourite band, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
So what we'll do, we'll wrap this up, and obviously, as always, as I always say to people who come onto the podcast, they always thank me for doing the podcast, but it's more important that without obviously guests like yourself, it's hard to do a podcast. So I'd like to thank you for your time, your stories about Bootlegs and your favourite Bon Jovi shows and John's vocals. That's one thing I've always wanted to chat to you about is John's vocals. And it was good to get a good 30, 35, 40 minutes, whatever it was, about John's vocals. And it wasn't negative, it wasn't criticising, it was just kind of our opinion on the decline of his voice. And I think this is why I do these podcasts, just to get different, just to let people speak about the feelings of the band a bit more in depth than Twitter or like a forum where you're typing something up and you press send. It's good to have a good chat about it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a great pleasure to be featured on this podcast.
I'm sure we'll do something again. And as I said there, thanks very much for your time.